Good evening, everybody, and welcome. My name is Dr. Jill Dupuy, and I have the supreme pleasure and privilege of serving as the Beaux-Arts Executive Director and Chief Curator here at the University of Miami, a post that I have held for an astounding, to me, 11 and a half years. What a delight it is for me to be able to introduce to you this evening our esteemed guest, beloved art critic and writer Elisa Turner, whose newly published book, Miami's Art Boom, From Local Vision to International Power, is both the catalyst and the fulcrum for tonight's panel discussion. Art historian, curator, and UM associate professor, Dr. Elisa James, who will be our moderator. The phenomenally talented artist, Edouard Duval-Carrié, whose stunning work, Grand Cousin, is on view in our Tobin galleries. Please don't miss it. And remarkable philanthropist, writer, and documentary filmmaker, Dr. Kimberly Green, whose family so generously endowed our Green Gallery back in 1995, a space that we continue to program and to love for temporary exhibitions here at the Lowe Art Museum. I encourage you to read with attention our guests' remarkable bios, which we have placed on your chairs. They are each so talented and so accomplished. Thank you all for so graciously sharing your time and your talents with us this evening. And thank you all for being with us here tonight. As many of you know, the Lowe is celebrating its semi-sesquicentennial this year, making us the longest continuously running art museum in South Florida. We are also the only art museum in Miami-Dade County with a truly global collection, which today comprises nearly 19,000 objects that collectively represent 5,000 years of human creativity on every inhabited continent. Though I am admittedly biased, I feel I am on solid ground in saying that the Lowe Art Museum, which was founded in 1950, was amongst the foundational institutions that helped lay the groundwork for the boom so marvelously profiled by Elisa, a phenomenon to which my team and I are proud to continue to fuel and sustain through our work here at the Lowe Art Museum on behalf of the many communities that we serve. Elisa's book, which chronicles the transformative years of the art world writ large in Miami between 1987 and 2007, shed lights on the exhibitions, institutions, and above all, the people who contributed in ways big and small to our city's now effervescent art scene. These exciting shifts and changes are a real part of the magical Miami moment, which has yet to crest, making now an excellent moment for us all to pause and to reflect carefully and critically with curiosity, gratitude, and respect on the many people who have made it all possible. Speaking of gratitude, I would like to acknowledge and thank those who have made this event possible. Books and Books, who will be selling Elisa's book in the lobby during the reception that follows. The Francine and Lee Ruich Educational Endowment, the National Endowment for the Arts, the University of Miami, the Lowe's Advisory Council, our members, and of course, the Lowe's #Dream Team, who makes everything possible here. They make my job look easy and they make me look good. So I thank you all very, very much. 2 housekeeping notes, please. Kindly take a moment to silence your devices. If it tweets, chirps, or plays the marimba, now would be an excellent moment to take it out of your pocket or your purse and put it into theater mode. I also would like to share with you that given the rich content of this evening's discussion, which I am certain will inspire many, many questions, we, in the interest of time, will not be doing a Q&A after the panel. I instead encourage you to engage in conversation with our wonderful guests during the reception in their honor that follows. Lastly, as many of you know, we lost an icon of the Miami art world just days ago. I invite you to join me in a brief moment of silence as we honor the memory of the incomparable Dora Valdez-Valley. And now, without further ado, please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Elisa James, Elisa Turner, Edouard Duval-Carrié, and Dr. Kimberly Green.
I thought long and hard on how I would begin this conversation, Elisa. And I just thought I'd start with a confession that I was reviewer number 2 for this book. And from the moment I read it, I supported its publication. So I'm really happy to be here tonight to have this conversation with you and Kim and Edouard on this book. And Miami, almost, the world that this book puts together for us and gives us a chance to, in a sense, remember and to imagine how we got here. I have to say that as a kid visiting Miami, I never thought that Miami had it in her to be what it is today. Returning on the rare occasions that I did as an adult, if there was something I wanted to see, I would come in and leave really quickly. But your book has given us an opportunity just to rethink how we got here. And I think it's an important text for this moment that we're in, because I think we're going to see even more changes. And we are seeing even more changes as we live this life here in the city day to day. So we have some of the best contemporary art collections in the world. And institutionally, I think Miami and its museums have really played a major role in collecting and shaping the conversation around contemporary art from the last 30 years. You had the wonderful luck to really witness and write about it. Edouard, you had the pleasure of creating and being an artist and coming into your own as an artist and being a part of its rise. And Kim, individually and through your foundation, you really played a role in stimulating, I think, the careers of artists, organizations, neighborhoods, and you've supported scholarship, including my own, indirectly. I want each of you to sort of comment on your experiences and perspectives on Miami before Art Basel. What was Miami like before the phenomenon sort of came and turbo boosted the arts community? Tell us a little bit about the Miami many of us don't even remember now.
Well, I used to think that when I first came here to live here, I thought Miami was flat and flashy. I did not want to move here. This was not my choice. You ask, why did we move here? And I was thinking, well, I moved here with my husband because there was a huge snowfall in Brooklyn where we lived, and he had trouble digging his car out of the snow. My husband is a Miami boy, born and bred, and we were living in New York for various reasons. And then the other reason I moved here was because of his grandmother's Cuban cooking. He really missed his grandmother's Cuban cooking. And there was no way I was going to even try to approximate that. So while he was digging his car out of the snow and driving down Eastern Parkway in Brooklyn, I was taking the subway off to Manhattan and working in publishing houses and visiting museums, going to having great bookstores. So it was a very different experience that we had of New York. And I totally understood why he was ready to come back to Miami. So we came back, and I think what a lot of people don't realize, I had started writing for Art News magazine before we moved to Miami. So my byline had been appearing in Art News magazine. I started reviewing art books. And then when I came here, one of my first big assignments was to profile Norman and Irma Grayman. This is when they lived on Pine Tree Drive. So it was part of Art News, this series called Living with Art. So I did that. And so I really learned about the Miami collectors from that experience. And actually, I first met Martin Margulies with Andrea Kirsch, who was a curator here at the Lowe. So I saw his collection at Grove Isle, that's where it was then. And I had the catalog that Paula Harper, who is no longer with us, who had written about his collection, and she was taught at U of M. So I had these things. So it wasn't like Miami was a cultural wasteland. I knew there were these important collectors, and Art News at that time, which was a print magazine based in New York, it had an international and a national reach. And because I had been writing for them in New York, when I moved here, they said, "Would you like to be our Miami correspondent?" And I said, "Well, okay." That didn't mean that I got any money from them, but it was prestigious to have my name on the masthead. And that gave me an entree into the art community in a place that I really didn't know well at all. And then Helen Cohen had seen, other people had seen my byline at Art News magazine, so she invited me to the Herald for an interview, and she gave me my first assignment. And my first assignment was to cover what was offered for Black History Month at the Miami-Dade Public Libraries. And that's where I met Barbara Young. So it was very interesting for me to learn how to drive around here. The traffic was bad, but nothing like it is now. So I did that, and then one thing led to another, and I realized, you know, Helen Cohen was a very formidable figure. If any of you remember her or knew her, she was very talented, very strong, and she covered a lot of the museum exhibits, or sometimes she would go to New York and cover what was at the Met or some major show in New York. So my beat was to cover the galleries. And at that time, it allowed me to meet a number of the young artists who were coming up. And so I remember one of the first gallery shows I wrote about was Pablo Cano did this amazing performance. It was surreal. It was nothing like I'd ever seen, with all these art historical references and kind of crazy in a way, called Animated Altarpieces. And that was at the Barbara Green Gallery. I think that was in part of Coral Gables. I don't remember exactly where, but so I wrote about that. And then little did I know that 20 years later, that would be performed in the garden of the Rubel family collection in Wynwood when they presented their first exhibit based on Miami artists. It's called Miami Artists at this time, and it's in my review is in this book.
Just for a bit of clarification, were you writing for Art News at this time, or were you already working for the Herald?
I was doing both.
Oh.
First I started for Art News, and then I wrote for the Herald. And it kind of, they really complemented each other.
Okay.
Because if there was a big national story, that I would cover it for Art News, and then the Herald would say, well, maybe you should cover it for us too.
So Edouard, you were in this world as well. You were living in San Juan, Paris, you were moving around, but then you decided to come to Miami. Tell us a little bit about what you found here and why you came.
How would I say? I was living in Paris then, and I was getting frustrated because in France sometimes, like when they choose sorry. Speak up, yes. Sorry. It was very difficult in the sense that curators in Paris and museums and stuff like that, they would only do you if the government allowed it to. It was very difficult. So they would come to me. Oh, somebody told me at the Ministry of so and so that we should come and visit you. And I was really getting tired of that. So they kept me in like some sort of, like cabinet with a drawer somewhere, like for the Caribbean representative, Anyways, I got fed up with that, and I heard read papers and stuff like that. Miami was becoming very hot and cool. And I was on my way to Mexico for a show at the Marco, and the plane left me. So I had to call, the plane left me, so I had to call friends that I had in town, and they promptly came by, all dressed up. Oh, we're going out. And we went down to South Beach, and I was totally transfixed. I said, Paris thought it was cool. No such thing. So I made my mind up very quickly, and went back and told my wife that that we should move to Miami. And then I was moving anyway. And this word is like, qui m'aime me suit, who loves me follows. So here we are. And it's been quite an adventure being in Miami.
Kim, your family has a long history of philanthropy in Miami. Tell us a bit about the work of your family individually and then the foundation. What came first, in a way? And, you know, what was the original mission? And was an interest in the arts always fundamental to the work you thought, your family thought that it would do in Miami?
So thank you for that question, and thank you for inviting me here today. This is a big honor to sit with you guys up on this stage. You know, I'm still thinking about Miami before Art Basel, and the different sort of phases that Miami has gone through. And I think that sort of will reflect our family's investments in Miami as well. My father moved here not alone at the age of 4 with his family from Pennsylvania. And my mother moved here after she met my father in the 1960s. She was here and was a participant in the Miss Universe competition. And she met my father, who was working for the mayor at the time. I think they both were teenagers. And so my mother moved down here from New York, and they started their life together here in Miami. And because of the opportunities that my father and mother were able to access through the growth of Miami at the time, through being able to travel up to New York and so forth, the opportunities that Miami provided them, it enabled their success. So my parents believed that it is important to give back to the city, give back to the community, and the place of which they were planted, so grow where they're planted, and to help others. But over the course of that time, from when my father grew up to when my mother came, you had different influxes of people that came to Miami that helped to shape Miami into sort of different molds. So I think when you look post-World War II, you had a lot of people moving here from Europe, a lot of Jewish families that moved here to Miami Beach and sort of set a tone for this sort of national perception of Miami of being an old person's place. But then you had the movement of the immigrants that came in from Cuba and other areas of the Caribbean and Latin America, but specifically Cuba, which then changed Miami again. And then you had the perception of Miami Vice and Scarface. And so Miami never really got to tell its own story. It was other people telling of what they saw. And I think when you meet people like Edouard and other artists, and not just visual artists, but storytellers, musicians, all types of performers, they are telling the story of Miami now, which is this amalgamation, is that a proper word to say? Of people that have come here while still recognizing the people who were here before, which are the indigenous people who occupied this land, who still exist. The Miccosukee are hugely successful and huge contributions not only to Miami-Dade County, but to the state of Florida. So I think we're finally coming into our own and standing our ground of who we are when new people come in, so there is a bit of institutionalized memory, which is being formed in Miami now.
So building on that, how would you describe Miami's arts ecosystem for the last post-Basel? And Basel dominates everything, the conversation that is Miami. But I want each of you to sort of think about the moment when you realized that this art scene was picking up momentum outside of Basel, that it would be something that would be sustained. What was there, an event? Was there an institution opening, a certain group of artwork that you saw? What was it that said that this was something this ecosystem was building and that it would be sustained?
Well, I think there was a time when Dara Friedman and Mark Hanford were both included in the Whitney Biennial, but at different times. And then later, Hernan Bath was in the Whitney Biennial, and I interviewed over the phone a Whitney Biennial curator, and I said, well, what about Naomi Fisher? What? And she said, you know, we're not sure why she's not in this year biennial, but we really love her. So people in New York were becoming familiar with certain artists here. And it was not at all unusual for me to pick up the phone and call the Whitney curator. And they would talk to me because, hey, I'm at the Miami Herald. Things are happening in Miami. So that was very exciting for me as a writer and as a reporter.
And following up on Kim's comment on the waves of migrants here to Miami, we often think of ourselves as a very transient city, like people come and go. As a writer, how did you see the sort of ebbs and flow that Kim describes in terms of migration reflect in the rise of artists in the city?
Well, I found it extremely fascinating. I mean, I grew up in a place that was very homogenous, and all the diversity in Miami just absolutely fascinated me. And the artists that I met had such remarkable stories to tell. Roberto Bejar and Rosario Marquardt were telling me about living in Argentina during the Dirty Wars period and how they had to be careful. They had a printing press in their basement and they had to hide it to make sure that no one found out about it. I mean, they would see people being shot on the street. And so I think that gave me a great respect for people who had come here. I mean, I had no idea of an experience like that. And then living in Miami, it's impossible to go through a day without hearing about Cuba or Haiti. I mean, it's kind of in our DNA. So when I was allowed to, when the Herald sent me to Havana to write about the Havana Biennale, it was fascinating to actually be there. And we visited my husband's relatives, and we took some things that they needed, some medicine. But it was a funny story, which I've told before, so maybe you've heard it, but the Herald was not allowed to be in Cuba. So my editor took me to see the Latin American editor at the time, Juan Tamayo, and he said, well, if you go, you have to go undercover. And my editor said, well, just use your best judgment. I thought, what is my best judgment for going undercover? I mean, I love my job, but really. And at the time, there were stories in the paper about this nice Midwestern middle-aged man who was in jail. He was with a missionary group, and the Cuban government thought he was a spy. Well, I love my job, but there's no way I wanted to go to a Cuban jail. So I had actually, this is when being part of Art News helped me a lot, because I had written a profile of someone on the West Coast, University of South Florida, who had, was talking about how their group from the university was going to Havana, the Havana Biennale. And I said, oh, can my husband and I go with you? And he will translate if you need anything. So that's how I went. I was determined to go legally. And so I was with this other university group. Well, the funny thing is, so I would be walking around Havana going to art events, and I would see all these people from Miami. And they would say, don't write in the Miami Herald that I'm here. And so, of course, I didn't. But at any rate, that was very exciting. And once I did that, that was my first overseas trip. I thought, well, this is pretty cool. I'd like to do it again. So I was allowed to go to Venice and twice to the International, and then I went to Art Basel because of Basel coming. Did I answer your question? I don't remember.
We're gonna start. That was lovely, but we're gonna circle back, right?
Okay.
So what about you, Kim? And you mentioned before we started our conversation that you returned to Miami in 1996. Was there a moment when you realized that momentum was building in the city for the arts? Was there the opening of an institution, a show? Was there something that made you realize, well, this is for
Yes.
real?
So when I first left Miami, I left for middle school and high school, and I went overseas. And when I left in the middle school, we moved to Boston. And I was always talking about Miami, to the point where one of the students in my class said, "Would you stop talking about your Ammy? We're sick of it." I always wanted to come back here. I always knew that there was a draw for me. The palm trees, just the beauty, and it's so close to the Caribbean, I just feel it in my bones for some reason. But so I moved back in the 90s, and a lot of people say that the 90s in Miami was lightning in a bottle. We had, South Beach was, as you said, you were enamored when you came and saw the influx and the mix of people, and also I think the neighborhoods that were sort of getting to a point where they were speaking for themselves, like I was saying before. But it was in the early 2000s, I remember being with a group of friends who were artists, and they decided that it would be fun to break into warehouses in what is now Wynwood and throw these art parties. And just word of mouth, people will come, we'll bring our own bottles of champagne and whatever, we'll all meet up. So we did that for a few weeks, and then a realtor who owns a bunch of property there, who I know personally, who knew me through my father, called me one day and said, "I know you, why don't you just ask? Why are you breaking in?" So it started, people started coming in and going to create Wynwood. Certainly not saying that I was a catalyst, but I was part of a group of people that were excited about this and that wanted to show what they were offering to Miami. And then in an extension from that, it was the graffiti, the gallery. All of these artists that were doing street art that then started to show in galleries and are still doing street art, but are also showing it. I mean, you look at someone, and excuse the name if you're not familiar with him, his name is A. Holsniff's Glue. He's a very prominent artist in Miami, but he started in doing street art, and he's now hanging in private homes all over the country, but he's still doing street art.
Edouard, I know, well, the party got you to stay. But
Yeah, after the party got me to stay.
But what happened?
There were institutions that were in the forming stage, like South Florida Art Center, and also the Bakehouse. And between those two, they provided space for artists to just practice their art and stuff like that. And these were quite crucial in people coming in, because you came and you managed to get a space in one of those spaces. And it was, a community of artists that would help each other. I had friends that would point me out, apply for this, you'll get the money, and things like that. And it was quite fascinating to see how the whole thing developed. And those institutions are quite major right now. Commanding the city elders to provide them more space, etc., etc. So I find that there was nothing like that in France. You had to go, if you wanted to go to a residency somewhere, you had to pass through so many hoops, and those were like so pristine and so, there was nothing like these places here, which were very organic, I guess. And you could get a space, and there was nothing programmed apart from just getting the space. And I guess most of them, still work like that, which is quite fascinating, that you can operate like that and not create, all sorts of barriers for artists to join them. And that's the beauty of it. This city has always been an open city, and this is what's really wonderful about it.
Kim mentioned being a part of a community of artists. Did you feel as if you entered into a community of artists, that you were a part or continue to be a part of a community of artists, or?
Absolutely. I mean, it went to the point where I'm a board member right now. at both of them, and which is quite fascinating. And I mean, their evolution is still marking the field. I mean, even at a national level, you know, like to have like spaces like that.
I also think you should mention the contribution that you have made, you and photographer Carl Hughes have made to Little Haiti in opening up that space to artists and providing opportunity.
Well, I mean, I came because there was a Little Haiti. I could not believe that there would be a space in the United States called Little Haiti. But hold and behold, I found out that the whole East Coast is littered with Haiti. I mean, you know, like, I mean, for one reason or another, apparently in the 19th century, some planters in the South from the Carolinas sent down to Haiti all their slaves, you know, so they could, you know, like be a free country. And it was quite fascinating to see that they came to Haiti. I mean, there might be one family that had stayed in Haiti, but all of them came back. And when they went back to wherever they came from, they called their neighborhood, mostly all of them black neighborhoods, Haiti. And the one that's most surprising is the one in Durham, North Carolina.
Yeah.
You've been there. You saw the church that has this gigantic heart on it, which is the symbol of the goddess of love in the Buddhist.
I think
Right.
I bought my first Drapo there in Durham. So yeah.
And it's quite fascinating. I mean, the links between those two countries. Essentially.
But let's talk a little bit about, to remember certain things, because I want to follow up on something that Elisa said. But we're talking about neighborhoods, right? And Miami changes at a dizzying pace. You know, we just mentioned Windward. You, Kim, brought us back to Little Haiti. You deposited your studio in the middle of Little Haiti.
Central.
Yeah. And in a way, it stimulated something around it.
I never thought it would, but apparently it did.
Tell us about that.
Well, it was affordable neighborhood, and I mean the means came. I mean the activities in Miami were quite fruitful, and I got some money, so I decided to purchase a building. I got quite a nice building in the middle of Little Haiti, and it was quite easy to get. I mean, it was really, I mean,
When was this?
This was, maybe 5 years after I moved here, and it was quite interesting. Now you are in the neighborhood somehow.
Somehow.
You are, and everything is evolving. I mean, it's neighborhood oriented. I mean, now it's changing too fast because it's becoming very expensive.
Does your studio predate the Little Haiti Cultural Center?
No,
Okay.
I was there when they broke ground, and a few weeks later I got an eviction notice. That was quite extraordinary. So I had to go down to the mayor's Coconut Grove and made a big scene, you know, that I had bought my land and this was not, you know, like communist country and blah, 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 blah. And they ushered me out very quickly, you know. But it was quite a scare because, I mean, I received a letter and then a gentleman came and said, you have to move out. I said, go where? And it was tough. But they allowed me there and the architect came. He was quite brilliant.
Built around you.
And he said, he'll build around me. So that was quite judicious of him because that would have been a serious thing.
Going back to something you mentioned, Elisa, about galleries, I think one of the things in your book that your book brings out is the ebb and flow of the commercial gallery space here in Miami. And I want, maybe you could speak to that about, you know, the galleries that were here when you first came, the galleries that are no longer with us, but the ebb and flow of the commercial gallery space here in Miami.
When I first came here, the major galleries, not that there were all that many, were on King Concourse in Bay Harbor Artists. And that's where they were. And they showed blue chip art, Andy Warhol, only Gloria Loria showed what was called local artists. That was kind of a stigma if you're a local artist. Now people say Miami-based, Miami artists. But then it was so different. But she did show Robert Huff, Lydia Rubio. I'm sure there are other artists that I'm not remembering now. So since my beat was the galleries, I would drive up there. And then the gallery started moving to Coral Gables. So I called it the Great Gallery Shift. There were some very interesting galleries in Coral Gables. And I talk about when Ramón Cernuda opened his gallery, and he felt that there was still not enough attention paid to Cuban art history, Latin American art history, and had this wonderful quote from Juan Martinez, who also is no longer with us, but made so many contributions here, pointing out that still in this country we tended to look to Europe, to the north, and New York, and he felt that it was time for Miami to be more recognizing its closeness to the Caribbean, and how the Caribbean was really shaping the art that was produced here. And
so
then now we see galleries from Little Haiti, they're going to Alapata. I mean, it's always changing. So I think that's interesting, partly because of gentrification.
Increases.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we don't necessarily have a gallery district anymore. Like, it's not just in Bal Harbour. We have Cernuda here in Coral Gables. You know, they're all over the place in some ways. Do you think that has helped us or hurt us by not having almost a central arts district?
Well, that's really interesting. I'm not quite sure. I think that because Miami has so much diversity and is so spread out, it's nice that there are these different neighborhoods that you can go and explore. And then restaurants pop up in those different neighborhoods. So it becomes a whole experience, which I think makes the city much more interesting.
One of the things I noticed, you mentioned the word Miami-based artist. How many artists actually live here or have studios here and have spaces here that most of us wouldn't first, sort of associate with Miami? What did you witness in terms of the growth of artists who stayed? Because I'm sure for many years, Miami was a place where Miami-born artists decided they had to leave. When did you start noticing that people were staying and that they felt, or maybe they are based in New York for a part of the year, but they had studio space in Miami and they were working here as well?
Well, I think that we can go back to Art Basel Miami Beach with all the flotilla, I call them a flotilla. Boat metaphors just occur to you when you're living here. But all the other art fairs that come here was attracting artists because they wanted to say, I'm a Miami artist. They thought that would increase their marketability. And maybe they were only here 2 or 3 weeks during Miami Art Week, but they became a Miami artist. So I think that's a good thing that for artists, for all of us, that Miami is becoming very desirable for people who are interested in the arts.
One of the things you mentioned, I was listening to you on NPR the other day, and you mentioned the importance of the Knight Foundation in the support, the publication of this book, etc. And I want us to all talk a little bit about that other arm of the arts world, the foundation. And I want to hear from you, Kim, about your foundation and how it came about and the emphasis on the arts. I know you support Haitian arts in particular. Talk a little bit about what you see as the mission, because I think it even comes back into this idea of neighborhoods again, because your new space is in BMO, in Green Galleries there. It's for me, a very memorable part of Miami that's changing. Talk about being situated in that space, but also the work of your foundation. And maybe we can all talk a little bit about, well, you can talk a little bit about the ways foundations, the public arts foundations, private foundations have been supportive of this space, cultivating the space that is Miami, and your own careers in your case. Okay.
So I think with foundations, what's been very important with the Knight Foundation, Perez Foundation, I'll include my family foundation in that, is that we're invested in not just one area of the arts, but all of the, and I'll use a medical term, all of the social determinants around what keeps an artist alive. And that has to do with access to healthcare, access to education, access to jobs, affordable housing. So these are huge topics to address. So investing in anchor institutions in Miami as well as grassroots organizations has been our approach, so that we have sort of the larger picture, the bird's eye view of what's going on when we invested in the Arch and Florida International University and Book Fair, which is based at Miami-Dade College. But then through those institutions and through our connections in neighborhoods, we meet people who are doing the boots on the ground work. And that is what keeps the artists alive, because all artists, majority of artists, have 2 or 3 jobs. They're trying to, when you say Miami-based artists, we're finding now that we had a huge bump for artists, and now with post-COVID, they can't afford to live in Miami anymore. So at Green Space Miami, which is our community art and conversation gallery, is initially when artists applied for our open call, they had to live and work in Miami-Dade County. That was part of the parameter. We've changed that because a lot of the artists can't live here anymore. They work here, but they're living in Broward, or they're, and we want to be open to artists that are trying to make Miami their home and trying to make Miami, elevate Miami. But I think with the foundations like the Knight Foundation and Perez, and I heard someone say, so I can't take credit for this, but the investment of foundation should be like scaffolding on a building. And that scaffolding is not supposed to be there forever. So they're supposed to help build that infrastructure, help to build that building, but then eventually it has to stand on its own. And that's where we're hoping that the art community and the Miami community does on its own.
What about you and your relationship with the Knight Foundation and other foundations?
Well, the Knight Foundation and Miami-Dade County were very early on supporting the arts in Miami. And I found that through my research. And in fact, a very well-respected former museum director pointed out to me that if you look at the major museums in New York, you never see anything about county support. But here, we have county support for PAM and other places. Miami-Dade County has been very integral to the growth of the arts community here. So early on, it was Miami-Dade County and the Knight Foundation. And then, of course, I have a special relationship to the Knight Foundation because the publisher of the Miami Herald at the time was Alberto Ibarguen, and he allowed me to take these incredible trips. And I thought, this is so exciting, but I never really understood that he always had my back at the Herald because I didn't have a computer there. My computer was at home. I was able to go around all the art events and then come back and pick up my kids from school, make dinner, and then work on my stories and send them to the Herald. Usually I made my deadlines, but I could send it by modem as long as my modem was working. And so I really never spent much time in the Miami Herald newsroom. I was always out and about doing things, and then having my life as a mom and wife and a family. So it was wonderful that I had that freedom. It really was. It was great for me to be able to spend time with my kids growing up and not having, well, the deadlines were always a part of my life. They were just, that's what it is when you work for a daily newspaper. Deadlines are part of your life. You can't help it. But it was a special kind of relationship. And then when Alberto left to run the Knight Foundation, things really changed at the Herald in many ways. And so when I started working on this book, both he and David Lawrence, former publishers of the Herald, knew that I wanted to get all my writing back from the Herald because I was never full-time. I was always a freelancer, an independent contractor. And I was able to do that. And I thought, well, now what am I going to do with these archives? And I had different ideas for projects. They never really came to fruition. But then, when I started reading all the press about the 20th anniversary of Art Basel, Miami Beach, and everyone was saying, particularly people from out of town that had wrote about it, who would have thought Miami could have a place like Art Basel, Miami Beach? There was nothing, absolutely nothing here. And I realized, but I've been writing about it. I knew what was going on. So that's when I thought, I'll go through my archives and see if I can put together a narrative of how Miami became what it is today. And then I put it together, and I had a proposal, and so I emailed Alberto, and I said, Alberto, would you be interested in something like this? And he said, yes, we would. And so then
There it is.
There.
Yeah, wonderful. Edouard, you you do a lot of curation as an artist, and I think your curatorial practice has been supported by many foundations. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of your practice and the ways in which Miami-based foundations have supported that work?
Well, they are all very accessible here. I mean, I'm not going to badmouth Paris, at this point. But, you have to take appointments. Barge in. They'll receive you. Telling a good story. Anyways, but it was the French that helped me. Because I came and I realized that early on that none of the fairs covered the Caribbean in any way possible. So I decided that I would create this series of exhibits. Yeah, sorry, I'm terribly sorry. I decided to create a platform where we could support not only one country, the Caribbean, but the whole Caribbean as a whole. So we named it the Global Caribbean, and the French government, the French Ministry of Culture, the Institut de France, told me of course we would support. They did it for 5 years because that's what they know. 5 years, everything has to change in France. They drop you like a sack of potatoes, and that's exactly what happened. So you have to. The lifespan but here the institutions are long-lasting, and the people in there, and they're very accessible, and they're very willing to support anything that's homegrown, homebrewed, So I think people generally are lucky here with this kind of support. And I'm looking at the bakehouse who do going by leaps and bounds, creating this, they're creating a whole neighborhood, recreating a whole neighborhood in the, what is it called, that place?
Wynwood Norte.
Wynwood Norte, yes. Everything has to have a name here, So Mimo, I didn't know that one. Anyways, it's quite fascinating to see the support that these organizations or these institutions or these businesses, ultimately that's what they are. They have their monies and they can play with it, and they're playing seriously with what's going on here in Miami. We should be very thankful for that.
You all mentioned the Caribbean in your comments, and perhaps you can talk a little bit about how the region has, in a sense, shaped the art scene here in Miami. Are there fundamental ways that you could sort of pull out? I guess you're here, you're kind of Exhibit A, but in other ways, how do you think the region itself, Miami's relationship to the region, has in fact fed the art scene here?
Well, one has to say clearly that Miami is an open city and very welcoming. And I've managed to put a Haitian voodoo goddess at the entrance of the Miami River. So, you know, I mean, how more successful can one be? You know, like to place a goddess, you know, like from foreign, alien culture, you know, like in the middle, I mean, right smack in the entrance of the city. So that always amused me. I was able to pull that one out. And
Was that a part of the public arts program?
yes, it was. It was the Perez that organized that. You remember that the walk,
You know,
river walk,
I'm not sure.
the river walk. That's what it was called.
Oh, yes, yes.
Yes.
Oh, no, you see that. It's really
Yeah.
quite amazing.
So this was, I mean, the product of it was a city invitation to artists to work on that, and also the one thing that I'm like a bit miffed with probably is the fact that academia has not followed, you know, like this kind of, I mean, it's not, I mean, you're the first Caribbeanist. Not yet, we're working on it. Yeah, we have,
I'm here.
you're here, yeah. No, but really, you're truly the first Caribbeanist. Yeah.
Wow.
I mean,
Responsibility.
Well, yeah, huge responsibility. But I think there have been others at FIU working on Cuba. I think I work on all
not
of
at a
them.
visual level.
Yeah. Oh,
Everybody,
okay.
yeah. Let's make it very clear.
I also think it's important to look at the ancestry of a lot of the communities here. I met someone the other night who's fourth generation Black Miamian, whose family came from the Bahamas. So, I mean, you have people who identify a certain way because they've been here for generations, but then you look at where they came from. And we were just talking about the Bahamas and the influence on South Florida and the communities here, what they've brought, their cuisine, their religion, their practices,
Music
music,
festivals.
you know. So I think all of that has shaped. If you look at the Gumbay Festival, I know that FIU just did, along with Dr. Rebecca Friedman and Carl Juice, a wonderful piece, which was just brought to the Library of Congress recently, photographs from the Gumbay, which I think went through, I don't know the history, but it went through an up and down period where it wasn't as active, but now again, the communities are being reinvigorated because their light is being shined in their area.
Well, I think as I was looking at what I had put together, reviewing it, looking for themes that I wanted to highlight in the essays for each of the 4 parts, it seemed to me that Miami, the culture here, has been extremely shaped, well shaped by the Afro-Caribbean diaspora. And there are just innumerable artists who are addressing that background. And one of the artists, one of my favorite artists, I think, is no longer with us. And he had a solo faculty show at the University of Miami. And his name was Carrie Stewart Coppin. And I would encourage everyone to please read what I wrote about him. You can find it in the wonderful index, which we all thank the Knight Foundation for providing to this book. He talked to me about growing up in South Bronx, and it was a very tough neighborhood, and he really didn't understand that how Wizard of Oz was in color because he never saw it in color in a black and white neighborhood, in a black TV set. So then he went to Kansas and he would start photographing people in Kansas who were celebrating Juneteenth. And then he came to Miami and he photographed in Little Haiti. He went to Cuba and photographed there. And then he went to Senegal and did photography there. So I thought that it was a kind of diaspora in reverse in a way. And I thought he was just a very interesting character. I'm sorry that I was not able to interview him again, speak to him again. But fortunately, he had given some of his photographs to the Miami-Dade Art and Public Places collection. So they had photographs of his work, and I was able to include them in this book. But I think there are many other examples. I think of Diaspora Vibe, Cultural Arts Incubator. I mean, the things that Rosie has done are amazing. Rosie Gordon-Wallace, who's director, made opportunities for artists to go to Suriname, other places, and then they bring those insights back, and we're all enriched by that. I think of a wonderful exhibit that Onajide Shabaka had based on his trip to Suriname, and he had this fascinating exhibit at the Brookdorf Gallery, which is no longer here, but this was in Little Haiti. And it was just remarkable. I learned so much from that exhibit.
We're getting low on time, but I wanted to ask about the title of your book is Miami's Art Boom. And of course, the inverse of boom is bust, right? It's always a shadow there. And you mentioned Emerson Dorsch, which we know closed this year. So the potential for that always exists in Miami. What do you think are some of the ongoing challenges that Miami will face, or that you've experienced in Miami, that may put pressures on this continuing boom, that may be a part of a step back?
There's a difference between Paris and Miami in the sense that in Paris, when an artist is considered, or for whatever reason, despite the fact that they're French or not, I mean, they will try to keep you in the city if you mean something for the city, participate in stuff like that. So this is that's where it stops. And I know that the consulate, the French consulate here, takes to Paris a lot of people involved in the arts just to show them how they work it. And it's very different from here because it's also very centrally controlled. I think they buy a lot of land and buildings and stuff like that, and in Paris you can have buy a very expensive apartment in one of the hoity-toity neighborhoods there, and you might have as a neighbor an artist that is paying practically nothing for his. Same layout, same everything, which is quite fascinating to see. Here it hasn't gotten to that point yet.
Or it's gotten to where Kim just said the artist can't afford to live.
Well, they cannot afford to live, yes, and there has to be I've been saying it and screaming from the rooftops, like that, they have to be careful with that. There are certain artists that ought to live in the city because they've informed it, or they just belong to it, and they just create such an aura around them that other artists want to come. And it's just a boule de neige, I mean, like a snowball. And I think the city should really start thinking about building, like low-income housing for artists, which is the big houses is pioneering in right now. So this is how that.
I agree with you. It's the real estate boom here, which of course, as you say, will have a bust. Mm-hmm. But I think that is the biggest challenge. I didn't want to bring up the dreaded 2 letters of AI, but I think that is also going to be a challenge because it removes the tactile experience that the artist will go into the community to build their art rather than sitting behind a computer. But that is not just limited to Miami, that's arts in general. But I think in the newer communities that are moving to Miami have a pioneering mindset where they think that this is sort of the gold rush and that there's no rules here and are creating their own. And it scares me a little because I feel an erasure of history because of institutionalized memory in Miami is not emphasized. And organizations like History Miami or museums like History Miami, we have the Digital Library of the Caribbean that are trying to keep this institutionalized memory are facing challenges. And I think Miami is at risk of losing her core because of that.
And I think there are 3 things that I was thinking about. You can say they are escalating, and they are escalating at the same time. The escalating cost of living, the escalating development, real estate development, and the escalating climate crisis. I don't see how that can continue. Something has to change.
It will snap.
So I'm going to give you the last word before we conclude tonight, Elisa, to talk about the future of arts writing. And, you know, this is, what you've given us is a kind of archive, right? And over the years, your writing has been, you know, you wrote for 20 years.
21.
21 years. So in this book, there's a history here that it contains.
This is 20 years, but it was 21. Well,
What's the future?
I know you asked me that question, and I frankly don't really know. It's becoming, as we have seen, newspapers are folding left and right all over this country. It's not just in Miami. The Miami Herald is now a shadow of what it once was. But there are some very good writers, some very talented photojournalists like College Juice there, but still, it's not what it was. And I would never have been able to do what I did if things were different, had been different. So I think you need to support, as a reader, the art criticism, art reviews, the art coverage that you like, and publications that you like. I happen to read Hyperallergic a lot. I think Douglas Markowitz of Miami New Times does a really good job. He also writes for Artburst, which I write for, although I've taken a long hiatus so I could do this book. And I think that we have to, it's again up to us to support what we want to see. There's no more dedicated art writer at the Miami Herald. That's gone. And I don't think it's coming back.
So let's end on a
Positive.
positive note. Let's end on a positive note. What do you want to? What's the future of Miami? What do you want to see for the future of arts in this city?
Well, I would just like to see it continue to grow and flourish, and more opportunities to see more interesting art. I think that recently I've been to two I think they're nonprofit spaces. One is in Little Havana called the Aluna Art Foundation, and I saw an amazing exhibit by Ruben Torres Yorca, who's actually in this book, and it was very poetic but very eloquent, very direct about pushing back against book banning. So these are very activist artists that are making us think about what's going on here and how can we change it? How can we all work together to change it? So I think that's great. And recently I went to the Copper Bridge Foundation, which is in Little Man. I beg your pardon. It's in North Miami. It's not too far from Mocha. And they have a fascinating exhibit based on artists who are really interested in indigenous culture of the Americas. So I think supporting, attending things like that is something that we can encourage in addition to art writing.
Kim and Edouard, what about you? What do you see what do you want to see?
Well, me, I'm very, how would I say, I attack the situation very clearly. I think this city should be like very central to the Americas. I think it should be the capital of the United States, point. And it should be, because of its strategic position and the way it's been evolving. And I think it's like the epitome for me of what the United States ought to be.
Kim, you'll have the final word tonight.
Okay, all right. Well, you made a very good point about how Paris treats their artists in the where they live and providing housing, and I think that is something I would like to see in Miami, have a little bit more support, admiration, elevation of artists, and at the same time, artists as activists, I think, is key. I think it is the artists in all forms of art that will change Miami. Everything from water intrusion to development to retaining the histories and cultures of our neighborhoods. So I'd really like to see more investment in the artists as activists, more investment in neighborhoods' identity, and that retaining their identity and highlighting their identity, so that we do not reinvent ourselves as New York. You know, I read something yesterday that they're changing, Lincoln Road is going to be called like Noli, North Lincoln, you know. And, yes, did you read that?
No, I missed that.
And I just think that we have names, you know, and we need to let those names shine, you know. So that's what I would like to see for Miami.
Thank you so much. I think this is a conversation I hope your book stimulates more conversations like this, because I think Miami needs to have this kind of reflective, these conversations in order to shape what the future might look like and to get input from those of us that live here and have come to love it. Okay, thank you so much, Elisa.